What is going on, everybody? I hope you're having a great day today. This is Alex from the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. This is the 14th episode of Season 3. Today, we're going to be talking about a wide variety of fantasy football questions, talking about players we are much higher on than most, much lower on than most, some DeAndre Swift hype, and breaking down two of the toughest players to figure out in fantasy football. Joining me today to break this all down is a man who has been taking over the fantasy football industry the last 2 years. He is the owner of a Discord with almost 900 monthly subscribers. He is the grandmaster of fantasy football threads, an accountant by day, fighting fantasy crime by night. He is a really great friend of mine and one of the smartest fantasy minds I have ever seen. With over 15,000 followers on Twitter now, he is Bulletproof's Drew Osinchuk. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, man. That was a great intro. Happy to be here.
No, absolutely. Always great to have you. And I mean, to my understanding, as what you do for an accountant each and every day, I don't know how you make time for fantasy football while working the hours you do. And props to you for still building one of the biggest fantasy football discords on the planet while still doing everything that you do in your day job. Props to that. But before we get into this, I have a question for you. And simply, we talked a little about this a little before the show, but for the people that don't know, like you said, that you told me before the show that you work 40 hours a week, in your accounting job, your day job, on vacation. So how on earth do you manage this and your energy wise? How on earth do you have time for a podcast on top of everything you do? That is the real question. Like, please speak to your dedication here.
I was being a bit facetious. It's not quite that bad on vacation, but
I know.
It's just, you make time for the things that you enjoy, and I like fantasy football, so it's pretty much my only hobby. So it's really the only thing I do outside of work and family. And that's as exciting as it gets.
No, that's fair. But I think the thing that I always find so interesting about people like you that, don't do this full time, but still do so much in the fantasy football industry is just the fact that a lot of these people will work, 40 hour, 50 hour, 60 hour, 70 plus hour during tax season, hours and weeks during, the season, but then still find time for fantasy football content. But I think that just shows of how much people just straight up love the game. Because a lot of people similar to you just say, this is what I do. You know what I mean? Like, I don't watch TV. I don't binge Netflix shows very often. Like, when I'm not with my family or I'm not working, like, this is what I do for fun. So I just wanted to, let the listeners know how much of a grinder you are and how much they should be following you if they don't already at DF Bean Counter on Twitter, one of the best follows on the planet. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. And like I said, I mentioned DF Bean Counter, Bulletproof Fantasy Football. So what is this great bulletproof process for the people that don't know? And with that, how did some of the bulletproof players come out as in this draft class so far for this year?
It's, in summary, without going into the long story on everything, it's basically a defined process where I looked at metrics that matter for various positions. Basically, I looked at all the metrics that I could think of and then figured out which ones actually mattered, and then took the ones that actually mattered and built a defined process looking at players that have a similar journey. So, for instance, with quarterbacks, things like their yards per attempt, completion percentage, ADOT, NFL.com grade, draft capital, like all these things have some degree of relevance in projecting these players going forward, or have in the past anyway, which likely means they will in the future. And then you kind of build together all these different metrics into some type of process or model that tells you which ones are the most similar to past players. And then the players that have the most similar profiles to the players that were good in the past, those are the ones we want to acquire. And the ones that had, all the players that did what they did sucked, then we don't want those guys. So we let somebody else draft them. And that's pretty much the gist of it. And then it's the same thing at every position. So at running back, we're looking at things like yards created from Graham Barfield or Lance Zierlein's NFL draft grades. Various production metrics and so on and so forth, draft capital, athleticism, so on and so forth.
That makes sense. And so wait, so is the best way to do it, just for my own just understanding, is it sounds like to me like you kind of put these players in buckets. So in buckets per se, it could be, Julio Jones. And if Julio Jones hit all this metrics, that would lead to a breakout. If there's someone else that hit very similar metrics to Julio Jones across draft capital, maybe PFF grade, draft grade, all that stuff, players that hit, similar metrics in these same buckets are more likely to succeed because players before them also hit all those same buckets to be able to perform. Is that a good way to put that?
Yeah, pretty much. If they took the same journey, they did the same things in college, they did the same things at the combine, depending on the position. Wide receivers, the combine is really highly irrelevant, but for other positions, it matters. If they, declared early, that's another big one. If they're young, that's better, and so on and so forth. And when you start breaking the players into these different types of buckets, you need to be mindful of a few different things like overfitting or overfittings where you build it so perfect that you're like extremely specific with your things that you're looking for. So for instance, if you were looking at what would be a good one? Let me just check something real quick here.
Yeah,
Let's say that you're
absolutely.
trying to build a production or a process or a model or what have you, and you wanted to find all the players that were good, and you knew that Michael Thomas was really good. And most people use a breakout age of 20, or 18 or 19, and then 20, and then 21 and over is different. But if you knew that you wanted to fit Michael Thomas into the good bucket, you would just use 21.5 and say everyone 21.5 and higher and lower is better. Simply because you want to fit Michael Thomas in the bucket. That's overfitting. That's where you're picking your sample to fit your narrative rather than picking your sample because it makes the most sense.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
that's one of the things you kind of have to watch out for is like when I'm building it, I don't even have the names turned on. Like I've hidden the names, so they're not even on my screen. I have no idea who the players are when I'm building it. And then when I get done, I'm like, turn the names back and I'm like, oh, look at this. These guys all showed up in the same spot. That's neat. So that's kind of fun.
Interesting. And then so with that, how does one get to like the bulletproof process? So like in terms of actual grades, like what are bulletproof players?
So years ago, before I had defined it, I used to do kind of an eyeballing thing where I'd be like, yeah, like he checks a lot of boxes. That's pretty good. I'll take that guy. And I was doing this thread for Kyler Murray. He was one of the first threads I ever did on Twitter. In fact, he may have been the first thread I ever did on Twitter. And it kind of came by accident. I was going through his profile. And I was like, oh, like this guy, he doesn't have any, there's no holes in this guy's profile. Like he's bulletproof. And that's kind of what I've always stuck with is like the players that literally give you no signs of like no true concerns. Those are the guys that I keep in the bulletproof bracket. So for wide receivers, it's like, yeah, they were productive all throughout college, or at least productive enough throughout college. And I have different metrics that I use to determine if they were. They declared early. They're 21 years old. They're high draft capital. They're, so on and so forth. Basically, there's no flaw in their profile that would suggest that they're not going to be successful. They're not all successful. That's not how it works. In fact, if you made a process so specific that you only had, if you had 100% hit rate in your best bracket, your best bucket, you've gone too far. You're missing a lot of players that you probably should have drafted that you simply didn't draft because you only wanted 100% bracket or 100% hit rate. Like you can find that you're going to end up with like 10 players and then that's kind of useless. So there's kind of a what would you call it? Like a happy medium or like a point of no return where you're like, this is as good as I want to get it. Like anything beyond this, we're overfitting, we're, whatever the case is.
So it's the best place to include a number, like at least a solid number of players that have the most likely highest hit rate among all positions.
Yeah, like 'cause sometimes I see people on Twitter and they'll be like, "Yeah, here's the best players." Then they have like 8 players. And I'm like, "Well, I mean, sure, yeah, those guys are real good prospects, but how helpful are you picking out 8 players in 18 years that you think are good draft picks?"
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't really help you a whole lot. Whereas like my buckets, it's not by design necessarily, but it worked out this way where, like for bulletproof players, I have like 6 bulletproof players per year.
Yeah.
Through no like designed, intention. It just worked out that way. And then when I got done and I was like, oh yeah, like that's about right. You know, if you have 15, then you have too many because there's not that many guys that hit. And if you have like 3 or 2, then you're really just being like, yeah, pick Calvin Johnson. That's the guy you want to draft. Here's my advice. Like everybody knows to pick Calvin Johnson. Your metrics showing that Calvin Johnson's good don't really help anyone.
Yep, that makes sense. So who were some of those players this year that really stuck out in this bulletproof process? Players that were some of the ones that really said that they're probably more likely than others to have a high hit rate?
There's quite a few. This was a pretty solid class. I'm just
Really, because this class was by Twitter was not graded very highly compared to future classes. And I know it probably has a lot to do with the quarterbacks in this class, not necessarily wowing people. But I think there were a lot of other interesting players, throughout the draft. So who were some of those players that stuck out the most?
So like one guy that I think will surprise maybe quite a few people, but maybe not a lot if they're involved in analytics, is Wan'Dale Robinson, which is honestly, I think one of the worst bulletproof wide receivers we've seen in quite some time. But he did qualify for bulletproof. And if you've ever seen the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, when Johnny Depp rolls into the dock and hops off his boat or ship, and they're like, that is the worst ship you've ever seen. He's like, but it is a ship. That is how I feel about Wan'Dale Robinson. He is bulletproof, but there's a lot of red flags with even him being bulletproof. Yes, he was wildly productive. Yes, he's probably pretty good at football considering he was drafted in the second round, but he wasn't projected to be drafted in the second round. He's projected to be drafted in the fourth round. And we know one thing about the NFL draft. It's the teams that reach on players suck. If they reach on a player, he doesn't have a better expected return than if they would have just drafted him where he belonged. Teams don't outproduce the market ever in NFL. So when the New York Giants reach on Wan'Dale Robinson and take him in the second round, yeah, that clicks the box and now suddenly he's bulletproof. But in reality, it's pretty unlikely that any other team would have taken him in the second round because virtually every mock draft that existed, sites like Grinding the Mocks or Mock Draftable or any of those types of sites, none of them had him as a second round pick. Everyone had him as a fourth round pick, which means he's probably a fourth round pick quality player. But now the Giants have made him bulletproof and it's ruining my life. Similar story happened actually in 2020, I think it was. There was I want to say, well-known, highly regarded tight end named Dalton Keene. And he was supposed to be a sixth round pick. And then in Bill Belichick's infinite wisdom, he took him in the third round, which voila, made him bulletproof in my process. And he instantly became the WOT of the bulletproof process because he's the worst bulletproof player, period, of any position to ever qualify because he had no business being drafted that early. It was complete lunacy that he got drafted 3 rounds ahead of his projected draft capital. And then he obviously sucks. So like, thanks, Bill. And now I don't even know who the GM of the Giants is anymore, but obviously there's still some residual suck left in that chair because things aren't looking great.
How could there not be with the Giants? But so wait, as you said, with the worst, bulletproof prospects, are players like Wan'Dale Robinson still someone that you're in on because they're in that bulletproof process? And if you could just real quick, could you list some of the players that you really believe in that were named as bulletproof prospects to help, ensure what your prior thinking was on them going into the draft?
Yeah, for sure. So let's cover your first question first, which was I already lost track. What was your first
Wan'Dale Robinson? So you do believe in him because he's a bulletproof prospect, or is he someone that really scares you more?
So like he scares me as a bulletproof prospect, but bulletproof prospects are like head and shoulders better than everyone else. So it's kind of like he's bulletproof, but like I don't think he's as good as Drake London, for instance, who's also bulletproof. There's a large degree of separation there. Even some of the coin flip guys, I would definitely take over Wan'Dale Robinson if it was straight up. If we're then comparing Wan'Dale Robinson's ADP to him being bulletproof, hell yeah, I want Wan'Dale Robinson because He's bulletproof, and his ADP is in a place where you never get to draft bulletproof wide receivers. So just take the guy and see what happens. Like, that was the same situation with Dalton Keene. It was like, I don't know, maybe Bill knows all, and we should just buy into Bill's assessment that Dalton Keene's a stud because he produced like a stud. He did everything he was supposed to in college, and then he showed up to the NFL draft and got his name called when he was supposed to. So maybe it's true. Drake London, on the other hand, Drake London has one of the best profiles, in my opinion, that we've seen in quite some time. Now, he's not a Jamar Chase level prospect. Let's not get carried away. Last year, I remember doing a podcast. I can't remember if it was yours or not, but somebody's podcast, and they asked me who was my guy in the 2021 class, and I was like, "Well, it's Jamar Chase." And they kind of side-eyed me, and I was like, "Okay, let me explain. Jamar Chase is everyone's wide receiver one, except for the Devonta Smith stands. They're a peculiar breed. They're irrelevant in this discussion. It's Jamar Chase for most of the world, right? Everybody was on Jamar Chase as wide receiver one. What made him my guy was that I wasn't just on Jamar Chase as wide receiver one. I was in on Jamar Chase as the 102 in Superflex rookie drafts. I was taking him ahead of Najee Harris, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Kyle Pitts, whoever. The only guy I was taking ahead of him was Trevor Lawrence. That was it. I was taking Trevor Lawrence and then Jamar Chase. He was my guy. Drake London isn't in that tier. Drake London doesn't approach that, but nobody does. There's like 10 guys in the history of the world that are in that tier. In fact, let me take that back. There's 5 guys. And Jamar Chase is the second best of all of them behind Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson is number 1. And then Jamar Chase was the second best prospect since 2003, in my opinion. Anyways, where I'm going with all this is Drake London is not in that tier, but he's still very, very good, even among bulletproof prospects. He is, I believe, somewhere around the 12th or 13th best prospect in my process since 2003, which is really good. That's like 20 years of prospects, and he's like top 10, 12, somewhere in there. So yeah, he's a real good prospect. I want him on all my teams. I was in on him when everyone was like fetishing over Treylon Burks and his raw athleticism and his ability to run real fast in a straight line and so on and so forth. And I was like, no, it's Drake, and then it's not Treylon. And yeah, so anyway, where I'm going with all this is that Drake London is real good. He did everything that you could ask him to. He was productive from a young age. He was a 2-sport athlete. He played basketball in college. He played NFL or wide receiver in college. He didn't even focus on football until his sophomore year. Until then, he was playing both sports. He was a 2-sport athlete in college, not just a 2-sport athlete in high school. And then not only that, he broke out at, I believe it was 18 or 19, and he did it alongside future Michael Pittman, or future top 33 pick or whatever pick he was, 34, I think, in the NFL draft, Michael Pittman. And he did it, who, by the way, is 4 years older than Drake London. 4 years.
Crazy.
And Drake still broke out while also playing basketball. Like, that's absurd. And then he did it alongside Amon-Ra St. Brown. In fact, if I recall correctly, he outproduced Amon-Ra St. Brown in their last years together. Now, Amon-Ra obviously went on to the NFL. He didn't get drafted all that high, but then he turned out to have a pretty good rookie season. So I think he's probably pretty good at football. So if we're looking at what Drake London has done, we're saying, yes, he did it young. He did it against NFL quality competition, both internally and externally. He wrecked college football this year. Like, he was a one-man show, a one-man offense, which is exactly what we want to see, right? Like, we want every defender lining up thinking, I got to stop Drake London. And then we want Drake London to win anyway, which is exactly what he did. So, and like, my process, I don't actually game adjust, which is kind of unique at this point. Not many people do that anymore. I think most people do game adjust, which is fine. It's a difference of opinion. Game adjusting, in my opinion, in my process anyway, it does find more hits without a doubt. You pick up some guys that you wouldn't otherwise pick up, but it picks up a whole bunch of guys you never would have wanted. And it doesn't help the overall hit rates. It actually decreases them. So I don't game adjust. That being said, even though I did not game adjust Drake London's final season, he still hit all my thresholds as a 20-year-old. That's crazy. The guy played like 8 games or something, and he still was productive enough as most of the successful NFL players are when they're in college in full seasons. Like the guy was a freak. And then he goes out and gets drafted in 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons. And like what's not to like? But that was probably one of the biggest kind of hot takes I had early in draft season was Drake London ahead of Treylon Burks. And then eventually it became Drake London, tier of his own. And then eventually everyone else was similarly on board. I don't know if everyone's quite on Drake London, tier of his own, but they were, or they weren't, or
Definitely. Well, I mean, I think by the end and right before he was drafted, he was. But I remember vividly that you were one of the first people on Drake London. I remember reading your thread, and I was like, "This is insane! Like, how is it not Treylon Burks, like the greatest wide receiver of all time?" Basically, obviously, I'm kidding when I say that. I'm being sarcastic about Treylon Burks. People that don't understand sarcasm, but it was not just the whole, Treylon Burks is the wide receiver one by far in a way anymore, like it was for so many people. Until draft season got a little bit closer. But on the flip side of that, Drake London, the guy on the offensive side that you really like, but is there any player, between quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end that you're a lot more sour on than the consensus? Doesn't mean you hate them or you don't like them, but just compared to how most people view them, that you're a lot more sour and you're not as in on as other people that they like, so far in this draft class?
Yeah. So there's a guy that I let me rephrase. Malik Willis is a guy that I could not understand people's infatuation with. If he got drafted in the first round, he would have been, I believe, the 4th worst passer among all first round picks dating back to 2003 in the metrics that I look at. The 4th worst passer. Do you know how many bad first round picks there are at the quarterback position in the last 20 years? It's pathetic. And he would have been the 4th worst. Like, he was an atrocious college passer. He's old and still couldn't be efficient. And he went to a small school and he still couldn't be efficient. Like, he's playing against poor players. I don't care that his wide receivers suck. He's still playing against poor players that he should be able to simply throw the ball where they're not. And yet he could not do that. He's not getting pressured at the same rate that everyone else is, or at least not as terrifyingly pressured as everyone else is. Like, I didn't get the appeal for him from a dynasty lens. If you wanted to say, hey, like draft Malik Willis in a redraft league, like take your shot at a late round quarterback that might pop. Yeah, like Malik Willis for sure. Like the guy could have, if he gets on the field, he's probably going to score some fantasy points. Problem is, he may never get on the field, and then he's probably not going to be on the field for very long because he's not very good at passing the football. And you can't simply exist as a rushing quarterback forever. Like, you need to have some element of passing ability, and he didn't display that in any season in the entirety of his college football career, which is crazy. And then I was on Twitter constantly, or especially in the patrons Discord, because there was a lot of pro Malik Willis talk in the patrons Discord. And I understand the appeal of, if you draft a player and they're only merely good and not great, they don't really matter in winning you a fantasy football league. But I also care about, does my asset go to 0? And Malik Willis had a very realistic chance of going to 0. So realistic, in fact, that he didn't even get drafted until the 3rd round of the NFL draft. Like, that's how bad of a player he was. He didn't even get drafted until the 3rd round of the NFL draft as a quarterback in the NFL. Like, you need a quarterback to win football games. Teams reach on quarterbacks all the time. He didn't even get drafted in the 2nd round. Like, that is a major indictment of his abilities as a passer.
And does that go with, like, and I just want, to ask you this, because I just want other people to understand, from a clarification argument, is there's going to be people listening to this right now that are saying, Drew, but Lamar Jackson and Trey Lance and Jalen Hurts, like none of them can pass. So
all of them were substantially better passers than him in college football, like substantially. Like,
agree.
Lamar Jackson, I think, was like, I don't know, 15th or something among first round picks out of like 43. Like he
Wow.
wasn't a bad passer by metrics in college football. He wasn't a great passer. And his passing, I don't know, I don't really know how it got so high. It was maybe 15th is high. Maybe he was more like 20th. But
Yeah.
he was like middle of the packish. Like there wasn't a glaring flaw here that this guy can't pass the football.
Yep.
And Jalen Hurts was pretty good at passing the football in college at Oklahoma. He wasn't so good at Alabama, but he was a young quarterback at Alabama. He was a junior and senior at Oklahoma. And then who was the other guy you said? Trey Lance. Trey Lance had one of the best passing seasons we ever see. The guy threw like 28 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Like, get out of here. He's not a good passer.
It's crazy. So you think it's very overblown that Malik Willis is just one of these guys that's going to automatically step on the field very quickly and produce?
I mean, if he steps on the field, he'll produce because he's going to rush the football and Konami is king. But is he ever going to get on the field? I would have my doubts. Like he might get in the game if he's a injury fill-in or something. But I seriously doubt there's ever going to be a season where a team looks at him and says, "You're our week 1 starter. Let's go." That's never going to happen. He's going to be a backup that gets thrust into a position to start if the starter gets hurt. That's it. That's his only path to starting.
That's crazy. And that's exactly what we're looking for here. A player like that just like does not pop like the same way you do. And that's hard to hear from me, but I'm more of a redraft person where I'm just like, I want the guys to have the rushing production, but it doesn't always mean the same thing in dynasty wise. And like you said, it doesn't mean he's going to get an opportunity on the field. I think one of the crazy things, like you said, is like people are still acting like he's a first round pick and that he's just going to walk onto the field and walk right over Ryan Tannehill. I'm not saying Ryan Tannehill is like the greatest quarterback of all time, but like, he's not going to hand over the keys. And, Ryan Tannehill said it himself that I'm not handing over the keys. I think that was overblown. But again, I think I'm agreeing with you 100%. But beyond the rookies this year, go ahead. Please.
On that topic of rookie 3rd round picks walking onto the field in week 1, it basically doesn't happen. Like,
really,
you're talking about winning the lottery at that point.
But Russell Wilson.
Get out of here. The guy, they're like, oh, Matt Flynn got paid. What are you talking about? Like, the guy played like 2 games in his career. He happened to throw 6 touchdowns in one of them. Like, it wasn't a wise investment. He never played football. So like, there's this talk on Twitter that I saw a while ago. I carried over into the Discord about Desmond Ridder gonna beat out Marcus Mariota in week 1, which is completely absurd. There's like a 0.08% chance that happens. Like it's so far-fetched simply because Desmond Ridder isn't good. He was drafted in the 3rd round too. If he was good, he'd have been drafted in the 1st round. He's a quarterback. Teams need quarterbacks. In fact, the Atlanta Falcons probably could have used a quarterback. They had Marcus Mariota. They still didn't take him in the 1st round. They didn't take him in the 2nd round. That doesn't mean that he's going to beat out Marcus Mariota because he's the 3rd rounder. Because now he's on the team. He's a 3rd rounder. That means he's not good at football.
Yep. No,
Marcus
exactly.
Mariota has started for, I believe, 4.5 seasons in the NFL. Desmond Ridder may never start a week 1 in his career. In fact, probably will not start a week 1 in his entire career, barring a preseason injury. Like, it's so unrealistic to even suggest that it's like a disservice for people that don't understand that Russell Wilson is a once-in-a-million phenomenon. They're thinking, oh, well, this comes back to this whole like thing that just drives me crazy where people are talking about like possibilities versus probabilities. It's like, yeah, anything is possible. Like, I could grow a 6-inch beard overnight. That could happen. Probably not going to. It's never happened before. Probably happened to someone once. I don't know. Like, it's just, there's so many things that are possible that are highly improbable. And people are like, it's possible. Don't tell me it's not possible because it is. I found one instance where it could happen. And it's just ridiculous.
What's the thing with like the every year when there's a 6th round QB that's an absolute statue that gets drafted that can throw the ball semi well? It's like, okay, well, he could be Tom Brady. And like you said, it's possible. Sure. I'm not going to tell you it's not because it's happened. But like it's happened once in the history of the entire NFL that's had 55 or more Super Bowls. Like it doesn't, like there's been so many drafts and it's happened one time in like 55 years. Like I get that this guy can't move and he can throw the ball somewhat accurately, but does not mean he's Tom Brady just because it's happened once in 55 years. So I'm with you. It's crazy, but we will digress and move on to bigger and better things. And go ahead.
Every single year, there's a guy that's going to be the next
Oh,
Tom
every
Brady.
year.
It's
Every
ridiculous.
year. Yep.
Like there's
Last year it was Mac Jones because he wears a blue and red and white jersey and he can't move. You
yeah.
know, I don't know. This year, I don't even know who would be. It would be this. Oh, it's going to be like Carson Strong this year. Or
Carson Strong would be the Tom Brady this year. There was a guy a few years ago. I think he was drafted by the Texans, and he actually was a Week 1 starter, which is hilarious. His name was Tom Savage, maybe?
Tom Savage.
And I remember specifically reading an article all about how he was the next Tom Brady as a rookie. Then he went in like round 4 or something. And I remember I saw somebody, I don't know where it was, but it must have been on like Bleacher Report or something because it was a long time ago. And saw people saying, "Oh, he's even better than Tom Brady. He's a 4th round pick, not a 6th round." Like ironically, not seriously. But it was like, "Oh, this is so hilarious! Like this is so true."
It's like people that like
starting Deshaun Watson's rookie year, and Watson took over by halftime of the first game.
It's crazy. It's like the people that like when Brock Osweiler took over for the Broncos and he won like his first 2 starts, people are like, this guy could literally be the second coming of Peyton Manning because he plays on the Broncos and he had like 2 good games. Like again, we have to digress, but like people see one game sample like Dak. Like Dak was like a late round pick and he won a couple games and they're like, okay, like maybe we have the next Tom Brady on our hands because he won a couple games and he was a late round pick. Like, come on, people. It's crazy to me.
Those QB wins are tough. Like that kid out of the he's not a kid, I guess. That guy out of the Jets last year. What was his name?
Oh man,
Phil something White. I can't remember.
Mike White. Mike White.
It was like, yeah, he's gonna take Zach Wilson's job. He's the QB of the future. I'm like, the guy's ADOT is like 3.7. Like, get out of here. He's not a real quarterback.
Yeah, he might be one of the greatest screen passers who ever lived, but he's not a good quarterback. But we will digress and we will move on to running backs, non-rookies now, moving on from rookies to non-rookies that we're too low on. And I would like to start here because on Twitter, as people that probably have listened to this podcast know, that I like DeAndre Swift a little bit. And Drew, I have done my absolute best to not talk about Swift very much on the podcast, but we are getting into that season where it's time to talk about him any chance I can possibly get. And I won't even state the full case. And I will say for the listeners now, my flag plant for 2022 is officially going to drop on this Friday's episode in a running back deep dive episode. Tune in for that for my official flag plant reveal 15 episodes into the season. But I had to be right. It had to be ready, and it will be ready. But right now, DeAndre Swift, I think, is one of the most undervalued players in redraft and dynasty alike. And I was someone that was very in on last year. That's clear. We don't need to talk about that. But last year, all he did when he was on the field was completely back it up. This man, even though it felt like Jamal Williams was playing 75% of the game and Swift was never on the field, DeAndre Swift was 8th in the NFL in median snap share. There were only 7 running backs on the field at a higher percentage than he was. He was 3rd among all running backs in target share. He was a top 5 running back before getting hurt. He was 2nd in yards created per touch, and he was 12th in weighted opportunities while missing 4 games. Weighted opportunities, for people that don't know, are carries plus targets combined. Targets are worth more because in PPR leagues, a target is worth more than a carry because receptions are worth more points. But this guy was literally top 3 in the NFL in weighted opportunities before he got hurt. Like, this guy was getting the most valuable touches possible. He was tied for the most targets per game in the NFL. He was 8th in the NFL in fantasy points per game, and he never had a serious injury. He didn't tear his ACL or tear his Achilles. He had a groin strain that he missed no games from, a sprained shoulder, and a concussion so far in the NFL. He's not injury prone because he's missed a maximum of 4 games at once. It's beyond me. DeAndre Swift is the man. I know you have him, I think, is your running back 2 in Dynasty right now behind only CMC. If I have that right, it might have changed. But Swift is amazing to me. Do you have anything to add on Swift? And who is your undervalued running back that people are not buying in enough on?
Okay, so earlier this offseason, I rolled out this brand new way of doing rankings. I don't do linear rankings anymore. So I don't have like a running back 1 or a running back 2 or 3, 4 or 5. It doesn't go like that. What I have now are clusters. And basically what I do is I do projections for the players. And then I cluster them based on their age so that you can tell which players I think are going to score the most points or a similar level of points at the same age or a similar age. So my top tier I had to call really good. I used to call it elite, but then I was told I was copyright infringing on Twitter because elite was owned by someone else. So that was awkward. And I had to change it to really good, which I think, delivers the same message. So anyway, in my really good tier, which I project for 20 plus points per game, under 24 years of age, we have Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift and no one else. I do not think any other players will be in that range that are under 24 years and old. That are under 24 years old. So, in my opinion, DeAndre Swift is probably the second most valuable wide receiver or running back in Dynasty, without question.
Wow.
In fact, if I was picking though, and I had to pick one player to keep him forever, I couldn't trade. I would take DeAndre Swift over Jonathan Taylor because he has a way higher ceiling than Jonathan Taylor. And people don't understand exactly what receptions mean for running back or for running backs, because DeAndre Swift has a ceiling that Jonathan Taylor could never even dream of. Jonathan Taylor ran scalding hot last year on touchdowns. He had 18 touchdowns in 16 games or something. Like, it was a wild touchdown season. He was running for long touchdown after long touchdown after long touchdown, which is great. And he may do it again. But unless he's going to catch 60, 70 passes, he's never going to approach the ceiling that DeAndre Swift can have. DeAndre Swift has 100 plus reception in his range of outcomes. And that is a level that is not attainable by players that do not have that kind of target share. DeAndre Swift could easily have a 25 plus point per game season, which is something that is like Jonathan Taylor, I believe, had 22.8 points per game last year. Jonathan Taylor's expected points per game was only like 19.6 or somewhere thereabouts. I can't remember this specific number, but it was well less than that. He ran way, way over what he should have. DeAndre Swift, on the other hand, if he gets the same type of reception or the same type of receiving workload that he had last year, which is not an unreasonable workload. He was around 20% target share, if I recall, by the time he got hurt, maybe a little higher. That's right in the range of where we expect the elite wide receiver or the elite running backs to be, is around 20%. There was nothing crazy about his target share other than showing that he is really freaking good at receiving the football because they threw him the football a lot. Anyway, he has 25 points. He has break fantasy potential. Jonathan Taylor doesn't have break fantasy potential. Jonathan Taylor needs a role change to hit break fantasy potential, and he's probably never going to get it. Jonathan Taylor is basically Ezekiel Elliott, whereas DeAndre Swift is Christian McCaffrey if he was like amazing, which he may never get to either, but he's more like Alvin Kamara. Maybe that's a better example.
Yep, I love it. And he also has an upgraded offensive line. But the thing I want to ask you, though, that I'm curious about, and as I go to is to my local neighborhood expert in Canada, and you, what do you say to the people that say, but Drew, Amon-Ra St. Brown's target share went crazy when Swift was out. He's still going to get a crazy target share. TJ Hawkinson will be back healthy. They added Jameson Williams. How can Swift maintain a 20% target share with all that extra added competition? And they added DJ Shark, who's awesome. I hate him, but they added all these players. Can he maintain that target share?
Absolutely, he can maintain that target share because the best players maintain their target share. They own their targets. So he may not build on that target share. Sure. Like, I wouldn't go out and say that DeAndre Swift is going to have an even higher target share this year.
Yep.
But he could have the same target share for sure. In fact, I think it would be kind of wild if he had a substantial decrease in targets because of anyone else on the team, because they don't run his routes.
Yep.
And there's a pretty good chance that the ones that DeAndre Swift are catching, there's no one else that's going to catch those passes. It's just him. So
that's what people don't understand.
I think one of the things that could affect things, even though it rarely does, is if they got another quarterback that threw the ball deep constantly, never checked down, or like a rushing quarterback. Like, let's say for some reason the Baltimore Ravens are unable to come to terms with Lamar Jackson. They end up trading him to Detroit. That's not going to be good news for DeAndre Swift.
Yep,
running quarterbacks rarely check down. So that's going to be not a good situation. But outside of something crazy like a Lamar Jackson or the second coming of Lamar Jackson arrives, I wouldn't be too concerned about DeAndre Swift. there's a lot of wiggle room there too. Like he doesn't have to maintain a 20+% target share to be one of the top receiving running backs in football. He's probably not going to break fantasy unless he gets 20% plus, but he could still be a top 5 running back with a 18% or 17% target share. So
Yep.
I'm
No,
fine.
I totally agree. Who's a player that you think is going a little bit too low right now at the running back position that you think more people should be in on?
Christian McCaffrey. People are constantly talking about, trying to win their league, which rightfully so. I play fantasy to win my leagues as well. But then every once in a while, a player comes along that just completely destroys fantasy. And then people don't move mountains to get that player. And it just perplexes me. It's like Christian McCaffrey is injury prone. And then it's like, well, actually, he played like 7 years in a row without a single injury. So he's probably not injury prone. But he's probably a running back. So he's probably going to hurt sometimes. So now, is this a trend of him now getting hurt all the time? Is he now injury prone? I have no idea. But I don't know that any running back is free of injury risk. They're all going to get injured. So take the one that can break the damn game and go win your league. And if he gets hurt, so be it. You can still win your league without Christian McCaffrey, but you're definitely going to win your league with Christian McCaffrey if he's healthy. Like there's no player in football that gives you a better chance to win your league on a weekly basis than Christian McCaffrey. He is the epitome of league winner. And for some reason, he's got, like, I'm looking at his keep trade cut value right now. It's 57.24, which looks like it's about wide receiver 8 or 9 or something like that. And that's just absurd. Yeah, he's a little older. He's 26 years old, but he's also one of the best running backs we've ever seen at scoring fantasy points. In fact, he is the best running back we've ever seen at scoring fantasy points. So if you're going to place a bet on an old running back, if 26 is old to you, then this is the guy you want to place your bet on. There's no greater fantasy football than Christian McCaffrey.
Okay, I love that. I love CMC. He's someone I'm going to be banging the drum for all offseason. But let me ask you this. You're offered a trade in a fantasy league. And I know that it depends on the team and everything like that. But what if someone said something like, I'll offer you DeAndre Swift and a 3rd-round pick, for Christian McCaffrey? Do you trade Christian McCaffrey, or do you say, no, this guy has a much higher ceiling, like I'm going to take him? If you're somewhat in win now mode.
I would never make that trade because I would want to have both.
Okay.
It's that simple. I'm not giving away a player that I want for another player that I want. If I'm going to go trade for Christian McCaffrey, I'm going to trade away somebody I don't think is valued appropriately or undervalued. So I'm going to go trade Jonathan Taylor and get Christian McCaffrey in a 1st-round pick or something like that. I'm going to go trade, I don't even know, Derrick Henry straight up if I can. That's not possible. Never mind. I'm going to go trade Najee Harris for Christian McCaffrey and a 2nd-round pick, an early 2nd-round pick. I'm going to go, that's probably reasonable.
Okay, that's totally fair. What about wide receivers, though? I have a wide receiver I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that I think is ridiculously undervalued in redraft, dynasty, and any possible fantasy format. I'm curious to hear yours, but mine is a guy that honestly could end up being in my guys at this point, and one of my 3 my guys, and I'm heavily debating him, but it's Allen Robinson. Like the Allen Robinson hate makes absolutely no sense to me, and then some. I mean, this guy was literally a top 10 wide receiver in 2019 and 2020. He had a terrible year last year with Justin Fields, the bad coaching, bad offense, but even in the role that he's going to be in, I mean, Robert Woods, who I think is less talented than Robinson, was a top 15 wide receiver the last 3 years under Sean McVay. Robert Woods was the wide receiver 12, a wide receiver 1 for the first 9 weeks of the season last year before he got hurt. And Robinson can play all over the field, and he could legitimately be a wide receiver 1 with Cooper Kupp to me. I mean, the Kupp and Woods together were wide receiver 1s. And when Woods went out and Odell Beckham was acclimated to that offense, Odell Beckham was averaging like wide receiver 1 numbers to the end of the season in the playoffs. I know that was a little bit because of, the touchdowns that he was catching, but the point is here is like whoever's playing this wide receiver 2 role, whether it was Kupp or Woods or whoever it's been the last few years under McVay, that player is producing. And then you add in a huge upgrade at quarterback, in Matthew Stafford. Like, who's going to take targets away? Van Jefferson? Tyler Higbee? Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is going to be a condensed offense with one of the most talented wide receivers we've seen in the last couple of years that is getting a huge quarterback upgrade when the second best quarterback of his career is probably Blake Bortles, is the second best quarterback of his career, and the best quarterback of his career is a guy who he's yet to play with. It's insane to me. I'm all in on Allen Robinson. Please don't tell me I'm crazy.
You're absolutely not crazy. I'm looking at his value right now, and it is, I have him marked as a buy.
As
no
you
shocker. And yeah, it's like ridiculous. There's a lot of guys in that price range that I like as well. Like Keenan Allen's like slightly more expensive. Brandon Cooks is a little cheaper. Like, give me any of those guys, but Allen Robinson is the guy. Well, Keenan Allen has a pretty high ceiling too. Give me one of those guys. Yep. Robinson's cheaper. I'll take him.
Agree.
You're absolutely right. Like this is the best quarterback he's ever played with.
By far.
Is extremely talented at football. Don't overthink it. Draft Allen Robinson. And also do not, under any circumstances, trade your 2023 first round pick for Allen Robinson in the middle of last season, because that would be idiotic.
I wouldn't. I have not. I will not. But who's a player for you for a wide receiver that you think that people are too low on? Or if you have a couple, please feel free to name a couple of players that, like, maybe it's maddening to you. Maybe you're, pulling that luscious hair out of yours, of players that, you just can't do it. But who are those wide receivers? Like Brandon Cooks, I think, is absolutely one of them that people are consistently undervaluing. But who are some guys that you think people are just too low on right now?
So I was going to give you some like high priced ones that, that like everybody knows, but like AJ Brown, like I've been like, so AJ Brown and I have a rocky relationship, to say the least. In 2019, pre-draft, I was all in on AJ Brown. And then he got drafted by the Titans, who had Corey Davis coming off with a 26% target share. Everybody still thought Corey Davis was a stud, including me. I was saying, you continue to draft AJ Brown because he's good at football. He then proved to be good at football. But then what happened was really interesting. His price went directly to the moon for no real reason. Let me take that back. For a real reason. He's really good at football. I get it. He is one of the best wide receivers on the planet and has been basically since he stepped foot in the NFL. But there was no way in hell I was buying him at wide receiver 1 pricing or thereabouts. That's where he was valued last year. And I couldn't fathom that price tag because he was playing for the freaking Titans. The Titans don't throw the damn football. You can't be the wide receiver 1 overall if your team only passes the ball 500 times a season. Like, it's simply impossible. You would need like a 40% target share. Maybe that's a bit extreme, but you need an absurdly high target share, which is never going to happen. Even for the best player, like the best wide receivers in football hover around 30%, and very, very, very few of them ever hit it twice.
Yeah.
In the last, 10 years or so, it's been DeAndre Hopkins and Devontae Adams. They're like the two guys that hit 30% more than once. That's it. Nobody else. Or at least not back-to-back anyway. I can't remember if there was any that did it over the stretch, but not back-to-back. So it's like, it's so rare. So AJ Brown was wildly overpriced. Now he gets traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, who are also a fairly bad offense in terms of passing, because Jalen Hurts isn't all that good at passing in the NFL. He's fine, but he's not good. And they didn't let him pass a whole lot. And now his price is cratered like 3,000 KTC points, keep trade cut points, between those years. And it shouldn't have, because he's got the same friggin' ceiling and the same friggin' floor, because both teams are hamstrung by low pass attempts and or poor volume or poor quarterback play.
Wow.
So
okay.
His value just like tanked for no real reason, in my opinion. So now I have him marked as a buy for the first time in like years, but he's too obvious, so I wasn't going to give you him. So forget all that. But you should probably buy AJ Brown. The not obvious one, the one you can go and get in every single league that you play in, and you absolutely should be, is Jarvis Landry.
Oh,
everybody's forgotten about Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry has an entire career of 25% plus target shares. If you have a 25% target share, you get a pretty realistic chance at a top 12 season. You have a near guarantee of a top 24 season, and unless things go like worst in the league type situation. And that's basically what he was in last year. Jarvis Landry was wildly ineffective. He was also playing injured for the first time in his life. He wasn't even supposed to be ready for the season. Somehow he played. It was painful. Baker Mayfield was injured after like week 2 and was an absolute train wreck of a quarterback last year. It was like the worst situation on top of the worst situation in which Jarvis Landry just sucked. We have a whole career of Jarvis Landry not sucking. He has top 12 seasons. He has a friggin' handful of top 24 seasons. Now he's allegedly healthy and is in a new situation with Jameis Winston, who is a pretty good passer of the football when it comes to offensive things. He's not so great when it comes to protecting the football, but we don't friggin' care if he protects the football. As long as he passes for 5,000 yards and Jarvis Landry gets 1,200 of them, we're happy. So here's the thing. If Jarvis Landry plays and is healthy, and Jameis Winston plays and is healthy, Jarvis Landry is probably going to be a wide receiver 2 at worst. If Michael Thomas does not play, which it's kind of sounding like who knows what the hell's going on with him. He's been out for like 2 years, and they're still talking about him hopefully being ready by training camp. Yep. So I'm just taking that and saying, I'll go buy some Jarvis Landry. We'll hope for the best. Even if MT plays, Jarvis Landry is probably going to be a wide receiver 2. So, and like his value right now, let me just look up how low it is because it's embarrassingly low.
That's crazy. I honestly didn't even think of that because you like a lot of people would think that okay, they have Chris Olave, Michael Thomas is coming back, Alvin Kamara, whatever. But on the flip side of that, it's like okay, well, Michael Thomas might not be ready for training camp. Alvin Kamara could be out of the NFL if this off the field case goes crazy, and then it could be Jarvis Landry with Jameis, 30 for 30 Winston, throwing to a Traquan Smith, a first-round rookie, no matter how good he is, and Jarvis Landry, which means like wheels up for Jarvis Landry potentially. So like I'd be buying him alone just at the factor, but the other part of it, like you said, is great players earn great target shares, and Jarvis Landry could still carve out a good target share even if Michael Thomas plays, and if Alvin Kamara plays, and if Chris Olave plays. But he doesn't need all that to happen when, to the top 2 probably target getters in this offense could literally not be playing come week 1. So I'm with you. What is his value?
So I just looked it up because I wasn't 100% sure. It turns out you can get him for the premium price of wide receiver 71.
Wow.
It's just craziness.
That's crazy.
Like last year, the Patriots wanted someone to buy. I gave them Antonio Brown. I said, I don't care about all his off-field stuff. If he steps foot on the field, he's one of the best wide receivers in football. You draft Antonio Brown. Hope for the best. We'll see where we get to. Jarvis Landry is a similar situation in which people have just completely written him off. Not similar in why they've written him off. They've written him off because they think he sucks now, which is ridiculous because last year for the Browns, he put up a 24.7% target share, which is directly in line with what he's put up every single year of his entire career. So just go get you some Jarvis Landry. He's basically free, and he's probably going to be a wide receiver 2 this year.
I love that. Is there any other players that also stick out to you here that are players that, are wide receivers at least that people are a little bit too low on?
Well, this one is near and dear to my heart because I'm a little upset about it. And I don't really know. I'm not telling you to go and buy him. I'm just telling you the masses are wrong. Okay. This is a totally different type of conversation. One moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Take as many moments.
Need a little fuel for this one. So there's a wide receiver. His name is Rondale Moore. He plays wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. He's real short. We all know this. He has a real low ADOT. We've known this since he was a freshman in college. He's never had a high ADOT. We've always known exactly what he is. He's a gimmicky wide receiver that's going to rack up catches around the line of scrimmage and is one of the most athletic freaks we've ever seen, is impossible to tackle. And he's always been that. There's been no surprises. That's exactly what he was in the NFL as a rookie. That's exactly what he was in college. There are no surprises here. Rondale Moore went out and had a solid rookie season. He didn't have a bad rookie season. He didn't have a good rookie season. It was fine. There was no red flags really outside of his low ADOT, which we knew was coming. That's what I don't get. We knew he had a low ADOT. We expected him to have a low ADOT. And then when he had a low ADOT, the masses punished the hell out of him. They nerfed him into the ground. It's ridiculous. So the masses, I do this thing called ADP trends. And basically how it works is if you lose 12 or more spots in ADP after your rookie year, you probably suck because they all suck. Most of them don't do what Rondale Moore did as a rookie, let alone that we expected what he did as a rookie. We already knew he wasn't going to be overly productive. We knew he'd be moderately productive. We knew his ADOT was going to be low because his ADOT's always been low. We knew he was short when he got drafted because he went to the friggin' combine. Like, we knew everything we needed to know to expect exactly what he gave us as a rookie, and then people nerfed him, and I don't get it.
It's crazy.
I'm rattled that the masses have turned on Rondale Moore. They shouldn't have. We already knew this was coming. And now they made him a face planter. And I'm left here with all my Rondale Moore shares, holding my bag after buying exactly what I thought I was buying. And the masses are telling me I'm wrong. And normally I always agree with the masses. And now I have to agree with the masses, except the masses are wrong. And I refuse to accept that he's a true face planter because the masses are wrong.
Really? And wait, can you please, like, I hate to digress. We're going to go right back to wide receivers, but can you explain what this whole face planter phenomenon is and why you think that maybe Rondale Moore could come out of this famous face planter thing for the people that don't know on Twitter?
Well, here's the thing. He is a face planter. I can't deny it. This is a defined thing. He has face planted by the definition of face planter, which is losing 12 or more spots of ADP year over year. How we got to knowing this ADP face planter thing was a thing was because back in, 2016, I was just getting into Dynasty. That was my second year of Dynasty. I started in 2015. And I was an avid Dynasty player from day one. That's not true. I didn't know anything about Dynasty. In fact, I started my Dynasty league simply because my friend had never played fantasy football, and I always wanted to try Dynasty. And it was too late to put a normal league together, so we put together a Dynasty league. Anyways, the moral of the story is I had no idea what I was doing. I was simply going off my gut 9 times out of 10 because I didn't know about fantasy football articles. I didn't know there was an entire industry dedicated to it. I was going off my gut. And then after my first year, I found a podcast. And then I started listening to lots of podcasts. And then I started reading lots of articles. And then I was like just completely enthralled in everything Dynasty. And like 90% of articles and like 90% of fantasy football content at that time was basically, oh, who sucked as a rookie? Yeah, go buy them because it takes time. Players take time. You got to let them develop. What were you thinking? You don't not draft Laquan Treadwell because he only had one catch as a rookie. He just needed time. The coach doesn't play rookies. Don't you know? He doesn't play rookies. Unless, of course, they're good at football, then he will. But if they suck, he's not going to play them. Kind of like the coach doesn't play bad players, which makes sense. Or like Josh Doxson, he got hurt. Basically lost his whole year to Achilles tendon. Corey Coleman scored 2 touchdowns, 108 yards in his second game. Then he got hurt, and then he came back, and he sucked. And all these guys face planted, and I was out there buying them all because everyone was telling me wide receivers take time. Wide receivers take time. You can't rush it. You need 3 years. You need to give a wide receiver 3 years before you can give up on them. So I got real annoyed in about 2018, 2017, somewhere in there. 2017, I think I started doing it. And I didn't get very far. I only did about 6 years or so, 5 years maybe of tracking ADP trends. I'm going back through ADP to see if, you could actually buy low on these players, and it never worked out because Kevin White sucked. Well, he got hurt and then he sucked. He played like a few games and sucked. And he was nothing ever at any point in his career. He's never been a fantasy player. Who else was back in that era? I can't remember. There's a whole bunch anyway. And I bought them all. My team was like a friggin', I don't even know, like a graveyard of face planters. But the face planter term didn't exist yet. There was just a graveyard of shitty wide receivers that never worked out. That needed time. That needed 3 years. So I started tracking them and looking at them. And I did it for all positions. I was like, well, can you actually buy low on any position? Like, is that a thing, or does it ever work? What are the odds that this works out? So I went back and I looked, and yeah, it's like basically a death sentence. Like, it's so rare for a wide receiver or basically any position to recover from face planting. If they don't impress the dynasty community as a rookie, they don't have to score a lot of yards, they don't have to score a lot of points, but they need to impress. And that's one of the things that I wanted to look at, because yardage thresholds, like, everybody's in a different situation. What about the guy that didn't get a chance to play because he was with I don't know, Green Bay, and I don't know, they got too many good players, so wide receivers have to wait, whatever. The point is, if a player is completely terrible as a rookie, it's probably because the player is just completely terrible. It probably has nothing to do with him needing time. Coaches are trying to win on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. So if the players aren't giving them what they need to try to win the football game, they're not going to put them on the field. And there's a pretty good chance they're never going to develop into that. And here's one of the biggest fallacies that drives me absolutely freaking crazy. Players need time to develop, right? Everybody's getting better. Everyone, think about that whole sentence. Everybody's getting better. Not just the shitty player that you think is good. Everybody's getting better, meaning all the other players on the team are getting better too. It's not just that one guy that's developing. There's 54 guys on the team, or how many friggin' guys are on a team? How many wide receivers on that team? Like 8? Well, if your guy got beat up by 7 of them, the other 7 are still getting better. It's not just him. Everybody's developing. And that's where I think one of the biggest misconceptions with development Twitter comes from, is they don't realize that it's not just their guy. It's all the team. The whole team's getting better. And guess what? They're also bringing in new players to compete. So your guy better be actually good to hold his spot. Anyway, that's what the face versus all.
No, that sums it up. That sums it up perfectly with exactly what what these face planners are, and guys that fall in value, typically don't. And here's one other thing I just want to set you up here. So, like what you mentioned is that face planners are, usually rookies that, fall at least 12 spots in ADP year over year. Who are some of the players that have succeeded as face planners? Because there's not many whatsoever. And even the ones that did succeed did not to a high level of success, except for one, former player. But are there any, face planners from last season of guys that had pretty high ADP in the 2020 class that are now considered as face planners?
Let me tell you the 2020 face planners. And 2020 face planners or the 2021 face planners?
The most recent draft class, 2021. I don't know why I was saying 2020.
So Travis Etienne face planted. He got hurt. He lost 16 spots in AP. That's not a death sentence, because here's what's interesting about this. As you know, I give all the players a grade.
Yep.
When I look at all the face planning bulletproof running backs, they don't suck. They're real good, in fact. So you should probably still be buying Travis Etienne, unless you think his injury is significant and he'll never be the same. That's a totally different scenario.
Yep.
But his face planting, I'm not that worried about.
Yep.
Trey Sermon face planted. No surprise here. So that was hilarious. One of my best takes of all time was actually like a out of the side of my mouth take. Like a throwaway joke that I never really meant, but if you asked me on any other moment, I would tell you I was dead serious. We were talking about Trey Sermon in the patrons Discord, and we had quite a few Trey Sermon stands, not because they liked Trey Sermon necessarily, but because they thought that any running back with the 49ers could be good, which I'm not going to argue with. Any running back that plays for the 49ers could be good. What I will argue with is that Trey Sermon was a substantially better bet to be that running back that would be good than all the other running backs on the San Francisco 49ers. I had made a comment showing Trey Sermon's grade and all the players that had the same grade, and made a comment. Not only may Trey Sermon not be the best running back of the 49ers, he may not even get on the field. This was in June, pre-training camp even. It was the most prophetic thing I've ever said. And it was totally 100% true. I absolutely believed it at the time. I did not believe it at the time. I thought for sure he was going to get on the field. I even thought he had a chance to produce for a while. I just didn't think he'd produce for very long, because And he's not good. Good players hold their job. He's not good. He'll get replaced. So he was one. And then we got Rondale Moore, as previously spoken, which is wrong. The masses have gravely erred on this one. Tremendous mistake. I actually have him marked as a sell in my clusters. I have marked as a sell only because I refuse to be the guy that thinks he knows better than the masses.
Yep.
But I think I know better than the masses, and I think he's going to be good. So I'm playing both sides of the coin here. There's really no way I can lose.
I love that.
Trevor Lawrence face planted for single QB purposes. There's not nearly enough data on Superflex to know if Superflex changes it for quarterbacks. But yeah, he face planted. I don't know if it matters or not. There's so few quarterbacks that face plant. I really can't say one way or the other. What I can say is he's one of the highest drafted 1 QB quarterbacks in history. So that might have something to do with it. And then Terrace Marshall, he also face planted, which should not be a shock. He had an atrocious year. And,
so
yeah.
So another question here, and this is just for the listeners that like understand the face planter part, that they're players that usually, fall off. How rare is it for these face planter players to come back to relevance and have like a top 24, top 12, top 5 type season? Like I know that like a lot of people just think, okay, face planters, yeah, they didn't have a great first season. They probably won't do as well the second season. But this is a lot more rare than people realize. So can you tell us just how rare it is for these face planters to come back into relevancy?
So if you wanted to hold your NFL first round pick, I'm not talking about dynasty first round picks. I'm talking about NFL first round picks, which is a rare breed, right? Like for wide receivers specifically. Yep. We're flipping to a wide receiver discussion because this is the one I recently looked into, yep, and it's completely fascinating. So if you have an NFL player drafted in the first round of the NFL draft that face plants per ADP trends, you can either hold that player or you can flip them for a random third round pick in a rookie draft, in a dynasty rookie draft, and you will have the same historical hit rate. So your first rounder is now worth what is equivalent to a dynasty third rounder. A dynasty third rounder is like, who's even getting drafted in the third round this year from wide receivers? Like it's nobody that you want.
Yep.
And that should tell you everything you need to know. Like we're talking about, I don't even know. Like
it's like Velus Jones. Like guys like that are getting drafted in the first round. Like a 6-year college receiver that had 1 year over 300 yards.
So that's not controlling for draft capital or for that's controlling for draft capital.
Yeah.
And then dynasty rookie picks. It's not controlling for player quality. So we can pick out some of the better players in the third round, but on average, a third round pick in a rookie draft is the equivalent of a NFL first round pick that face planted. It's crazy. On that topic, if you wanted to draft or if you wanted to know who the good players are that face planted, I will give you one that was actually good. And his name is Demaryius Thomas. And do you want to know why he face planted? Because this is like,
I actually don't remember. I know you've talked about this before, but I don't know why.
After his rookie year, Demaryius Thomas then tore his Achilles tendon in March.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Which tanked his ADP for May, which is why he face planted. He's the guy that came back and crushed. That's it. That's the whole list. That is the entire list of face planters that were like top 5 wide receivers.
Out of how many? How many wide receivers?
70 or so. 80?
So let me just say this for the listeners as clarification. If you're not understanding, is that of these players that lost at least 12 spots in ADP from 1 year to the following year, there has been one player out of 70 that has later hit a top 5 season. Is that correct, Drew?
You would be correct.
And that's the thing with people that they don't understand is you want to win your fantasy leagues. I want to win my fantasy leagues. Drew usually wants to win his fantasy leagues as well. And the players that are going to win your fantasy leagues are players that you draft in the top 5. And I know that, they're face planners. They're a little bit cheaper. But of course, it's like it goes back to the Tom Brady thing we talked earlier. It is in the range of outcomes for these players to come back to a top 5 season. But it's so unlikely and it barely ever happens. And that's why you don't want to draft these face planting type players, because it is in the range of outcomes, but it is so beyond rare for wide receivers to eventually hit a top 5 season after face planting that you should stay away from. Of course, it's possible. Of course, the guy that you think may be the guy that finally comes back and does it. I can't tell you no, but it's probably not going to happen. And for that reason is why we avoid these face planting type players like the ones you mentioned.
So I looked it up. There's 73.
Wow.
Of which one hit a top 5 season. If you want to do the math on that, that's 1 out of 73, a 1.4% historical hit rate.
That's crazy. And how many of those 73 later hit a top 12 season, not even top 5?
It gets really wild at this point because we literally double it to 2.
To 2. 2 out of 73 hit a top 12 season after dropping an ADP.
Yeah.
It's madness.
So again, this is a wild and crazy percentage, but 2.7%. And the second guy that did it is Will Fuller.
Shout out to Will Fuller,
who just hit it like 2 years ago and a half season.
That's crazy. Do you know how many players even hit top 24 out of those 73? It's probably not too many.
Yeah, I could tell you real quick here.
Yeah,
maybe. No, I can't. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
9 out of 73. No, listen, people. That is one singular top 24 season after face planting.
12.3%.
12.3% chance that your player hits a top 24 season as a wide receiver in their career, that they hit a top 24, and you have a 12% chance after they do that. A 2% chance that they finish the top 12, and a whopping just over 1% chance that they get a top 5 season. It's crazy. We will move on from face planners. I get it. Drew, I have 3 more questions for you, and we can get out of here.
Hit me.
We'll talk about,
Hit me.
Oh, absolutely. I will hit you. Just again, I can't hit you because we're in different places. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. But 2 players I want to talk about. I talked about this at the top of the show. Players that are really confusing to me. And I'll state what I have, and I'm sure you have something pretty wonderful on these players. This works with the topic of wide receiver. Actually, Drew, if I can real quick, I have a 4th question. I want to get to this one real quick before the face planners. We can go over this quickly. But on the topic of face planners, let me just backtrack real quickly. I'm sorry, listeners. But Michael Pittman was 1 spot away from being a face planner, 1 spot away from being one of those players that is almost doomed to ever come back to fantasy football relevance. But I'm someone, Drew, that believes in Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman's a guy that I'm excited about. I mean, he earned targets last year like you enjoy, 8th highest target share at 24% last year. He was 3rd in route participation among all wide receivers. Every time they were passing the ball, he was on the field. It's exactly what you want while getting a high target share when on the field. He was also number 2 in route run win rate, according to Player Profile, which means he was always getting open when he was on these 98% of routes. I know Matt Harmon's reception perception hasn't come out on him, but just the route run win rate is probably going to be pretty high. And Michael Pittman was a guy that Matt Harmon said was a guy you should be targeting because he got open at a high level as a rookie. And then he did that, got the targets in this offense. But the other side of it, Drew, is he was almost a face planner. He was almost one of these guys that I just went on a rant about that has almost no chance to come back to relevancy. So is Michael Pittman going to come back to relevancy? Is he not? What are the chances? How do you feel about Michael Pittman right now?
I feel uneasy. I don't know which way he's going to go because he did have a good season this year, but he also has an absolutely horrendous prior to this year. He was a bad college prospect who was a bad rookie, which typically means a bad career, but then he had a good season. So who knows? And if I don't know or I don't feel confident one way or the other, I tend to just sell the player.
Yep.
If I don't know if he's going to be good, I'd rather just sell him for somebody that I do think is going to be good because we're pretty good at picking out who's going to be the good players. And I'd rather just go with what I'm comfortable with. And if I can't get a player that I think is going to be good, I'll just cash him in for a draft pick because then I can get a player that I think actually has a chance at a long career. And I don't know that Michael Pittman does. I don't know that he doesn't either. After this last year, there's no real concerns, I don't think. From the season, other than he didn't really have to compete with anyone to catch the ball, but he was pretty good. Like he wasn't a bad player this year. Any of his like metrics that you look at to quantify if this player is good or bad usually showed up on the good side.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Like I think he's fine.
But sticking with USC, what about someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown? It's another player I want to talk about. As you called the sun god in one of your podcasts last year, before he had any chance of breaking out, he was someone that you had on a podcast and you said, you should be keeping an eye on this Amon-Ra St. Brown guy. Like he's someone that you should, be keeping an eye on. And I remember saying that, and I remember having him early in the season and him not doing well. And of course, right when I dropped him is when he turned into like the greatest wide receiver of all time down the back stretch. And
You mean when
here's
he
the thing.
turned into the sun god?
He turned into the sun god. But here's the thing. I know that he has increased target share. I know that TJ Hawkinson is still there. And I know that they drafted Jamison Williams, which much mean they don't believe in him, that he has no chance of ever being good because they drafted a first-round wide receiver. But Amon-Ra St. Brown has a really interesting case. Among every rookie wide receiver, round 3 or later, with an 80-plus rookie PFF grade, there's only a very few amount of players on this list that had at least 250 routes run. That list is Doug Baldwin, Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. All had a 80-plus rookie PFF grade. That's the list. That's the entire list of players that did it. He also was the wide receiver 5 from weeks 10 on. And I know that from weeks 10 on, what are you saying, Alex? That's half a season. The season was 18 weeks. He had a 9-week stretch, half of a season, that he was the wide receiver 5 in all of fantasy football. There were only 4 players that scored higher than he was, and 2 of them were Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams. I can't think of the last player, but that's about it. Those are the only players better over half a freaking football season. It's crazy to me. And the other thing, Drew, before I let you take over this, targets are earned. Players earn targets. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, as a rookie, had a 21% target share and had an even higher red zone target share at 23.7% in the red zone as a rookie, while getting this PFF grade that has only been among other elite players, commanding a clear target share, and being a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy football for half a season as a rookie. He had those games where you work out the rust as a rookie, and then he came in and then produced. I don't care who was on the field. He earned targets. He produced. He was a top guy for half a season. Drew, I'll let you take it over from here. Do you believe in him? Do you not? The floor is yours.
Okay, so let's go back to Amon-Ra St. Brown, the rookie, the prospect, pardon me. Amon-Ra St. Brown would have qualified for my Bulletproof tier had he been drafted in the first couple of rounds of the NFL draft.
Oh.
He was everything that I look for in a wide receiver. And then he fell to round 4. And then he was nothing that I look for in a wide receiver. That is a bad omen. If you do not get drafted in the first 3 rounds of an NFL draft, you're basically toast. The percentage of players that come out of the day 3 that actually are good is like astronomically low. You might as well buy a face planner. Like they're so incredibly low. So Amon-Ra St. Brown went from hero to zero. And then he didn't really do much in the NFL to start with. And then he started doing a lot. And I was pushing back. It's like, no, like we need more information. We don't at this juncture, I'm not buying it on Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then it kept going. 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 And then finally, after week 17 or 18 or whatever week ended the year, I went back and looked at his PFF grade. It was and looked at his sophomore comps then. Sophomore comps is a whole new process I developed last year that is like the best thing I've ever done. And what I do with that is I look at players' PFF grade, their points per game, their pre-grade, their prospect grade, and then I look at the players that did similarly within those spheres. And once we got the sophomore comp season, Amon-Ra was like back to the sun god. He looked incredible. And then I had to go on Twitter and say, I have changed my mind. Amon-Ra is now very, very good. And I will be very happy to hold Amon-Ra St. Brown on my team. And then it became a matter of price, right? Like every player, you need to determine if A, you think they're good, and B, if you think they're valuable. A player can be good and not valuable. A player can be valuable and not good. See, in this case, I thought Amon-Ra St. Brown was now good, but I wasn't sure he was valuable. That was where my hangup was. He was going for some pretty hefty prices. Now he's going for 4,211 KTC points, which I don't think is too bad. Actually, I have him as a hold. I don't think he's necessarily a slam dunk buy. I don't think he's a slam dunk sell. I think I just like to sit on him and see where it goes from here, because I think he is good at football. And at the end of the day, if I'm holding a player that's good at football, eventually he's probably going to be good at football or good at scoring fantasy points, because good players tend to find a way. We'll see what happens with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I do think that DeAndre Swift is good. I do think that TJ Hawkinson is good. I think that Jamison Williams is somebody that could be good. I'm not like locked into Williams by any stretch, but I don't think he's bad. So Amon-Ra, yeah. When I first discovered, I don't know if I'd never seen this before from anyone ever. Pardon me. I'd never seen this before with anyone for Amon-Ra St. Brown, or from anyone, period, looking at rookie year PFF grades. And I know you cited 80. I actually use a lower threshold. And when I first discovered it, it changed my whole life. Like, I was like, oh, wow. You can actually pick out day 3 players that are good. You can pick out players that basically did nothing that are good. Everyone who does this is good. Everyone. Every single player except for one. And I can't remember that guy's name. He was wildly unimportant. But like Antonio Brown hits it, and Stephon Diggs hits it, and Doug Baldwin hits it, and on and on and on and on. And it was just like, wow. Like, this is like finding the lost ark, or whatever the hell they call it. No, the Rosetta Stone. Is that the one that you can decipher all the languages from? I don't know. I'm not a historian. The point is, it felt like my eyes were opened, and I suddenly had a way to then compare bad prospects and find a way to say which ones were actually good. And Amon-Ra is the guy that I think does that. I've seen a lot of people talking about it on Twitter the last few years, or the last year or so, which is funny because I'd never seen anybody talk about it before that. But it's kind of like one of those things when you buy a car. You buy a car. You own a car? You must own a car.
I don't own a car. I live in the city. I should own a car.
Does that matter?
I live in Boston. There's nowhere to park.
Oh, well, I don't live in big cities. Anyway, once you buy a car, what you'll notice is you see that car everywhere.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I did in high school when I had a car. Yes, that was absolutely the case.
Yeah, it's wild. And I don't know if that's the PFF grade thing. Like, maybe I had just discovered it and then suddenly I started seeing my car everywhere. Yep. Or if I had discovered it and then other people started catching on to it. But it was cool anyway. But yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown is like pretty good, I think. It's not really a hot take. I don't have like a spicy take on Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm just like lukewarm.
Well, here's the other thing that also makes me believe in him is again, this is kind of, I promise I will not scream or rant or yell into my microphone again about this. But do you know who the top 4 wide receivers were in the NFL last year in fantasy points? They're Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, Justin Jefferson. Okay. From weeks 10 on, half a season, after, he had his first, 8 games to, figure things out as a rookie. After that, there were only 4 wide receivers better than him. Once again, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson. They were the top 4 wide receivers, like for the whole season, and the top 4 wide receivers from weeks 10 on. After that, Amon-Ra St. Brown was the best wide receiver not named those players after week 10. And hold on. And I know that our Bulletproof patrons right now probably jumping up and down about points per game. He was still number 1 in points per game outside of those players, among players that played at least like 6 games over that 8-game stretch. He was still number 1 outside of those top 4 players. And again, that doesn't mean automatically he's going to be good. But again, he's in some pretty historical comps, for PFF grade. The fact that he did that, in the second half of his rookie season, which I know half of a season isn't that great for other players, but for rookies, that is pretty important and pretty indicative. So we'll finish with that. But 2 more questions for you.
Don't finish yet. I want to come back and talk about that for a second, because I think one of the things that people that are fading Amon-Ra St. Brown are looking at is, oh, look at his or like Uber plugging him is looking at his last 5 or 10 games or whatever it was, weeks 10 on, and saying, well, this is the norm. And it's certainly not the norm. And nobody thinks it's the norm. Yeah. What they should be doing, and in my opinion, what people should be doing, which is maybe not right, but Anyway, basically what I do is I look at a rookie's season-long target share. I don't care what their last half the season target share is because I'm comparing everyone across the board. And when you do that, Amon-Ra St. Brown still had a 21% target share. So now we're looking at a player that had 21% season-long target share, and we're saying, what will he have next year? And it's pretty tough to like reduce his target share because he was a rookie for half the year, or he was a rookie that wasn't producing for half the year. So I like when I'm doing my projections, I'm looking at projectable range of outcomes. I'm doing a couple of different scenarios on what I think is possible for Amon-Ra St. Brown based on, history or the player, if the player has more history, or like, historic day 3 picks that did what he did, so on and so forth. And when I do that for Amon-Ra St. Brown, what I'm looking at is a player that is probably going to be in the 20% target share range at worst because he was already at 21. I'm not looking at his last 10 weeks and saying he had a 40% target share, so he's going to continue that. I'm looking at it and being like, well, he had 21%. It's pretty unrealistic to project him for less. That's probably his floor. And then we're looking at a range of outcomes on what to increase it by. And when we increase it, we're, jumping, 2 or 3 percentage points per pop. So floor 21%, moderate or like medium outcome, probably like 24%. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Sun God, probably like 27, 28%. And when you look at that, it's like, well, yeah, he's still like a potential top 12 wide receiver. He's probably, in my opinion, more likely a wide receiver 2 candidate than a wide receiver 1 candidate.
Agree.
But you're only paying $42.11 for him on KTC, which isn't all that much. For instance, Darnell Mooney is at $41.81. And if you gave me the opportunity to trade my Darnell Mooney for Amon-Ra St. Brown, I would need to buy a new keyboard because I would have smashed it hitting the accept button.
Yep,
like
exactly.
He's priced fine. And there's other players that are priced badly in that price range that you could easily flip for him.
Yep. And that's the point I'm trying to make. And I know that I've gotten excited about it and I've given all these stats. Like, it doesn't mean that I'm like, Amon-Ra St. Brown is ranked as my wide receiver 13 right now. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I think he's a lot better than people have him value-wise in both Dynasty and Redraft. There's a chance he could be a wide receiver 1, but more likely than not, I think he's a wide receiver 2 this season. That's all I'm going to say. Like, he was great last year. He's probably a wide receiver 2 this season, in my opinion. Doesn't think that just because, the only 4 guys ahead of him, where he was last year means I think that, like, I have him as a wide receiver 1. That's not the case. It's just showing he has clearly a lot of talent. The situation, I think, does favor him, even if he has a little bit more competition, and we'll see what happens with him. But nonetheless, someone I'm very excited about. Before we get into your flag plant, which will be the final question today, another guy that's perplexing is Mike Williams. Mike Williams is, I'm not going to get into a screaming match about, how great he is and how many players were better than him over like a 9-week sample size. I promise I'm not going to do that again. But Mike Williams is someone that's pretty interesting because he had a big role change this year. But like, I think that Mike Williams is really interesting. I've heard the case for both sides. I mean, like on one part of it, Mike Williams had 40 end zone targets since 2019, the most valuable targets in all of fantasy football. He's had 40 of them over the last 3 years, and he's only converted 8. One of the best jump ball wide receivers in the NFL, one of the most physically most imposing players playing with good quarterback play the last 3 years, has only converted 20% of the most valuable targets in the NFL. He's destined for positive regression. He also, last year, had a career high in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. He's also going to be 27 years old, in the prime of his career, ready to go up top and fall on his back and hurt it and not play for the rest of the season once again. This guy also had a career high 20.8% target share, thanks to his career low 10.8 yards per ADOT compared to 14.8 being his previous low. His role was a lot different. He was running a lot more shorter routes. And I know he had a knee injury that really affected him last year, but this is still a condensed offense where Josh Palmer is going to be the 4th option. Like, I know that he's competing with Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler, but the 4th option is also either Gerald Everett or Josh Palmer. It's going to be a condensed offense where we can maintain a high target share. But the other side of it, like you said, Drew, is he's never had a high, which you didn't say, but I'm saying is he's never had a high finish. He has never produced for a full season. He's like Devontae Parker, where every single year he's a breakout candidate, and he's a guy that's flashing in training camp or hurt in training camp, and then consistently never really does it for a full season. So do you think that this is a season where he could actually do it? Or is this just Mike Williams hype that we do every year and it's not going to happen?
This is Mike Williams hype that we do every year, and it's not going to happen. And for the record, I've never done this hype.
Okay.
But like, quite simply, we go back to 2017, his rookie year, and we just look at how much he scored in fantasy points year over year over year over year. We get 2.3, 11.1, 10.8, 10.2, and then 15.4. One of those is not like the other one. And the one that isn't like the other one is the one that people want to cling to because it's the most recent one. There's a pretty good chance that that was a weird season. And furthermore, if you look at the games that he played, he goes 22, 22, 31, 33 to 36. That's his first 5 weeks.
Yep.
Then he goes 4.7, 3.9, 7.8, 7.3, 20, 7.9, 16, 12.1, 7.9, 15.3, 26. It was a weird season. I would never bank on this again. Players don't typically put up top 5 seasons for the first 5 weeks and then completely disappear for the next 11 weeks or 12 weeks now.
Yep.
It's just so unlikely that this is the new norm that I would never pay whatever his I don't even know what his price tag is, and I know I won't pay it because I'm not betting on that one outlier season out of 5. Yep. Like, if a player takes 5 years to do anything, they're after being the 7th overall pick in the NFL draft. This isn't like some guy who had to work his way up the roster. He arrived on, like, in the facility, expected to be a stud and never was. He probably didn't just figure it out. He probably just caught lightning in a bottle. So I just move on.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I think the other thing that, and I didn't understand this. I've always been a fan of yours. You've known that. But I think one of the things that there's going to be some people that are listening that are going to be saying is like, this guy's insane. Like, Mike Williams is clearly going to break out. But I think the thing that people don't understand is the other, the inside of part of what you're saying, which is just the probability. What's the probability that a wide receiver that's flashed for like 5 or 6 games and is 27 years old and is a former 7th round pick going into his 5th or 6th year in the NFL? What's the probability that player finally breaks out regardless of if everything is going right? And could it happen just like everything else we've talked about on this podcast today? Absolutely. Sure, it could. Sure, Drew could be wrong. But if you're playing the numbers, it's probably not. I think this could be a rare case where it does happen, but I know the numbers are not in favor of this.
Like, if you wanted to buy Mike Williams, you also would have bought Kenny Britt after his big breakout with the Rams in 2016. You would have bought what the hell's that guy? Terrell Pryor after his 1,000-yard season. You'd have bought, any number of different players that didn't break out until they were basically toast. And that's the crux of my entire philosophy with fantasy football is what did other players do that got to this point? And then what did they do next? And almost every player that did what Mike Williams did. Devontae Parker's another one. He's a one-hit wonder that broke out with a top 12 season, if I recall, better than Mike Williams, and then completely disappeared the following year. This is just what happens. Sometimes players catch lightning in a bottle, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And it's really hard to project that to happen again because it was such a rarity in the first place. Like, it's just super rare to have this like weird 5th or 6th year breakout and then have it actually continue. Usually if it's a 5th or 6th year breakout, you're like, thank God I can get out of this guy. I finally have a sell window to unload my 5th year breakout. Perfect.
Exactly.
Some other folks are like, just like I always expected, I liked him as a prospect, and here we are 5 years later, my prophecy is true. The truth has arrived. Buy some Mike Williams. It's just like, show me a time this happened and then it was real. It's like Adam Thielen. Okay, you got Adam Thielen. Who else do you got? Adam Thielen was also an undrafted rookie who barely played for 5 years. Not a guy that was 7th overall that was on the field for like 80% of the snaps for 5 years. Like, it's not the same thing. So, yeah, anyway.
Yeah. And I think that again, I believe in him probably a bit more than you do, just because of the situation. But like what you're saying is again the historical numbers, and if you're playing the past data points, it says probably not. But it's interesting to know if it could happen.
If you if you like Mike Williams because of the situation, you should just go buy Jalen Guyton for free.
Yeah, honestly, that's fair.
I would never do, but if you liked him for the situation, I'd just go buy somebody else in the offense. If you like Mike Williams because the Chargers is a high-powered offense, go get you some friggin' Keenan Allen because that's the good player in the offense.
Yeah, definitely. I struggle. I'm definitely going to keep struggling with Mike Williams, and I think that everything you said is completely fair. But so when there's guys like Matt Harmon, Dwayne McFarland for PFF, Josh Larkey. I mean, I think three really really smart minds. Especially about wide receivers, and all those guys believe in Mike Williams. It's hard not to, but the numbers that you're talking about and how rare this happens for prospects like that speak for themselves. So it's such a tough situation. But his price is still pretty high. It's about as high as he's ever finished.
I would suggest, and I could be wrong because I haven't seen those guys' analysis, but it sounds to me like they're basing their analysis on a singular year, which was last year.
Yep, and that's where most of it was coming from, of how much his role changed, how much the quarterback changed things, and how much, but everything around him did change. But did it?
Then how come we didn't produce for the last 10 weeks? No, not even 10 weeks. Like from week 6 on, did his role change back? Or did it stay the same? Because we saw not the same Mike Williams after 6 weeks.
Yep, and it was blamed a lot on the knee injury. And again, I know Josh really believes in him. I know Dwayne made a case for him. I know Matt Harmon liked him last year. I don't know if he still likes him this year. So please do not quote me. And as me speaking for those guys, they're all like truthers of Mike Williams. I was thinking about that and I was like, okay, I don't want people to all of a sudden think that I'm calling these guys out like they're riding right with me. I know that there was a guy that they've had some hope for at least, but I know Josh Larkey at least likes him for sure. But again, we will digress from that. I just wanted to make
sure. Does Josh Larkey like him? The guy's got a 20% target share,
and Josh Larkey is a huge analytics guy. Loves Mike Williams.
Shame on Josh. I'm gonna go tweet at him now.
And watch, I probably have the wrong person, and Josh hates Mike Williams.
No, he probably likes him.
Go all down. Yeah, he probably absolutely. Mike Williams is his least favorite player in the world. Mike Williams probably poured a drink on him at a bar or something like that, and he hates him. And I'm gonna be a clown for this, but that's why you probably don't name drop and stuff like that on people that are in on it. But
so to be clear, Matt Harmon has Mike Williams with really good reception perception in years past.
No, sorry. It was that I know Matt Harmon last year was he was one of the late round players that he was targeting was Mike Williams. I'm pretty sure that he was in an article that was a late round player that could break out. And he's Mike Williams is a case. His reception profile doesn't say it, but the potential is there as someone that's a late round dart throw. I wouldn't necessarily call Matt Harmon a truther. Matt Harmon, I'm sorry if I used you too hard, but we will digress from that.
Harmon, we're just trying to get to the root of this.
So yeah, absolutely. We may need him to step in and just call me a liar, call me out on Twitter. I lose my following, my job, and I have to just live on the streets of Boston without my car because I don't own one and I live in the city, and it's all downhill from here. But that's usually how it goes.
So Dwayne McFarland though, he likes win rates and stuff, right? Like man coverage win rates and things like that. So Mike Williams has really good man coverage win rates then, or what is McFarland like him?
I'm trying to think, and I can't think back to the I can barely remember what I ate for breakfast, and I'm gonna have to do that. And it's probably the same thing where I'm just making stuff up, but I'm pretty sure that we talked about him on the episode that I have, and I'd have to ask Dwayne myself of what was your reasoning behind that of why you really liked him. But again, that is neither here nor there. Yeah, Mike Williams is someone we talked about, and I'm pretty sure you liked him. That was on. Okay, it is what it is. But I'm sorry we're going so off the rails here, Drew.
No, I'm having a blast because I'm grilling you now on this. Outlandish Mike Williams love affair.
But it's because by my thought process, and I could be completely wrong. Other stats guys like yourself might be in on him, and that is
I'm not in on him. I would never.
Sorry, I was saying other stats guys that are also stats guys like you, not necessarily people.
Nobody's perfect, so everybody has their flaws. There you go, Josh. Sorry about that.
This clip is gonna get tweeted out to like Matt and Dwayne and all this, and they're like never gonna want to look at me again just because I might have thought that they were like truthers for them for a little bit. So
They probably love Mike Williams, and they're gonna be mad at me because I think that he's not very good. It's gonna be great. Either way, no matter what happens next, it's gonna be great for everyone.
Absolutely, as it
except
always
for Mike Williams. That's the only person not gonna be great.
Except for Mike yeah. Jalen Guyton is going to take over, and Mike Williams is going to be, like begging for change with me on the streets of Boston. It
won't be Jalen Guyton. It's going to be Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler and no one
100%,
else.
100%. I just wanted to throw some shade at Jalen Guyton,
as we should. As throw all of them.
Absolutely,
bury him in shade. In fact,
he totally should. But Drew, my final question for you today on the podcast, and for the people listening to this podcast, this is the best part of the entire episode that has been absolutely action-packed. This will be the longest episode in Fresh Fantasy Podcast history at 130 episodes. What is your 2022 flag plant? Last year, you planted your flag on Cam, the effing Ram, and then he tore his Achilles, but was about to have the greatest running back season of all time, hopefully. But who is this year's flag plant? Who is this year's player that's going to tear his Achilles next month and make this take irrelevant? Who is the player that you
now believe? I'm terrified because I'm going to make the guy tear his Achilles tendon again. This is outrageous.
I'm just coming after everybody at this point.
Oh, my God. Saquon Barkley, I'm so sorry for what it's worth, but Saquon Barkley is my flag plant for the year, and I believe he will be a top 3 running back in the 2022 NFL football season, simply because he is possibly the greatest running back we've ever seen outside of no one. He's probably the best running back we've ever seen. Okay, maybe not. But he's really good at football, and I'm going to give him a top 3 season this year because I do think he's going to be back to normal after this year, or after his, he tore his ACL, he had a high ankle sprain, he had all these, debilitating injuries, and running backs get hurt. We talked about this Christian McCaffrey. Running backs get hurt. I'm not that worried about a running back gets hurt because they all get hurt. And if Saquon Barkley is back to normal, he's going to be a top 3 running back because he catches a ton of passes, although he didn't last year. But in the past, he's got a ton of passes. For instance, as a rookie, he had 91 receptions. 91 receptions. That's the type of rookie year. 24 points per game. That's the type of season that breaks fantasy that only a handful of players in the entire world are capable of putting up. That's what Saquon Barkley brings to the table. He is priced nowhere near his ceiling because he's been hurt. And I agree to some extent that he should be faded a little bit, but he shouldn't be where he is. There are players going ahead of him that have, they would be lucky to sniff his worst season, basically.
Yeah.
So just give me Saquon Barkley, and everyone else can go directly somewhere else. Wow. He's RB13, for goodness sakes. RB13 in Dynasty.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Okay, but like you said that with the football, I know he's running back 13, and that's why you're buying him as your flag plant because he's so low in price. But this year in fantasy football, in a redraft league, this season only, I know you like Dynasty, and this is a Dynasty podcast, but would you take DeAndre Swift or Saquon Barkley this year? Gun to your head.
DeAndre Swift.
Okay. Is it close for this year?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's close, but you would take Swift, but Barkley, would Barkley, do you think, be a top 10 guy in your redraft rankings right now for running backs?
This is such a complicated question because rankings are so broken, and 100%. I will rage against the machine on rankings every single day because I'm never going to be on the clock and having to pick between Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. Do I think Saquon Barkley has a higher ceiling than Jonathan Taylor? Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. But I'm never going to draft Saquon Barkley over Jonathan Taylor because Jonathan Taylor's available at the 101 and that's it. And Saquon Barkley is available in the second round. Yep. So I'll just go ahead and take Saquon Barkley in a redraft league in the second round after taking Jonathan Taylor in the first round.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
The problem with the rankings is that the context of a ranking is who would you take, player A or player B? And I'm going to draft the guy at cost and hope that the other guy falls.
Yep.
I'll take the higher ranked guy first, and then maybe the lower ranked guy falls to where I might get him. That's what I'm going to do in a redraft league. But if I had to say, what is the order of the running backs that are sorry, how do I word this? What order will the running backs finish in? I
Yeah.
believe that Saquon Barkley has top 3 potential. I think there's probably Christian McCaffrey at number 1 without a doubt. And then I think it's like a 5-way tier of Saquon Barkley and DeAndre Swift and Alvin Kamara.
Okay.
Is that 5 or 4?
That's 3.
Who am I missing?
Eckler?
No, I don't. Eckler's not that high.
Najee Harris. I'm just kidding.
No, hold on a second. Let me get back to my running backs here.
Maybe it's Joe Mixon. You were a believer in Joe Mixon last year before.
Oh, for sure. I was a believer in Joe Mixon. But he's not going to be top 5.
Yep.
No. Yeah, okay. It was Javonte Williams, but he's not going to anymore now that Melvin Gordon's back. So,
agree.
Yeah, it's, 3 guys that have top 5 potential, and Christian McCaffrey, number 1. And then Jonathan Taylor is probably the guy that I would pick with, the next guy up in terms of where he will finish. But Jonathan Taylor is like locked into that spot.
Yep.
Like his floor is his roof. Like we know, in my opinion, we know what we're getting with Jonathan Taylor. With these other guys, it's like, yeah, okay, we might get a little less than Jonathan Taylor. Like if DeAndre Swift goes out this year and puts up 18 points per game and Jonathan Taylor puts up 19, I'm fine with it. Even if I had Jonathan Taylor in place of, or if I had DeAndre Swift ahead of him, because I wasn't shooting for 17 or 18 points per game with DeAndre Swift. I was shooting for 25. Like that was the goal. That was going to win me my league. So I shot for the ceiling and it didn't work out. Whatever. I lost 2 points per game. No big deal. Saquon Barkley is the same idea. Yeah, he's probably going to have 18, 19, maybe 20 points per game, but he could also have 25 because that's in his range of outcomes. So anyway, I think Saquon Barkley is probably a top 3 running back this year. It's going to be probably Barkley, McCaffrey at number 1, without a doubt. It's Christian McCaffrey. There's no one else. He's number 1. We have no debates there. And then after that, it's like, well, Jonathan Taylor's probably going to be in and around there at like 20 points per game, 19 points per game. Saquon Barkley's probably going to be in and around there. Alvin Kamara, if he plays, is probably going to be in and around there. Saquon or DeAndre Swift, if he is healthy, is going to be in and around there, which is like, just give me Saquon. I think he's real good.
I love it. I love
Saquon. He's going to get a lot of touches this year.
I know. I will be drafting so much Swift, Saquon, Leonard Fournette, some James Conner with the value that he's at right now in redraft. Like guys like that like are just going to be on the field, catching a lot of passes, all that kind of stuff. I'm so excited for this year. And Drew, I'm so beyond excited to have you back on the podcast again. This episode was phenomenal. This will actually be the longest episode of this podcast by probably at least minimum 20 minutes off the top of my head, but it was so worth it.
That makes sense because we had so many insightful things to say.
But here's the other thing, and I will close with this, and I'll give you a chance in just a second. But like, this was not an episode where we lollygag and talk slowly about a bunch of different players. Like we were literally just yelling and getting excited about so many different fantasy football players. And this episode was as action packed and as funny as any episode I think I have, and the people will love this episode. But Drew, people love this episode, but what they love even more is you, the human you are, the person you are, and the analyst you are. Such a pleasure to have you on this podcast again. Before we go, please plug it for the listeners. You have one of the biggest Patreon followings in all of the fantasy football world, and everyone should be in your Discord, as I have been for the last year now. Please plug for them everything they need to know.
All right. So, yeah, the Patrons Discord, I think, is invaluable. We have a number of analysts now that are helping chip in with some, like, honestly, just some incredible content. Guys like Jacob Sanderson and Cooper Adams, and we got the Davids lately, the tight end guru and the running back guru. So that was pretty exciting. We got a Cash and Ian who are doing the R Squared podcast on the Bulletproof Fantasy Football Podcast Network, and Adeko, I never remember how to say his name. It's crazy. Adeko, I think it is. And nobody knows who he is. And he is like the best analyst in football. And it's ridiculous. But he doesn't tweet anything. The only thing he does is come on the Patreon and prove me wrong every freaking minute. And it's super annoying, but it's super helpful because he's incredibly smart.
Yeah.
And he's basically only found in the Patreon and is a integral member of the cast. So anyway, we're all at Bulletproof FF on Patreon. So come check us out. And then we got the podcast, which I haven't done my own podcast in like a year. Well, not since I think the Joe Burrow episode, maybe, which was a real hit, if I recall. So yeah, but Akash and Ian are holding down the podcast for us for now at the Bulletproof Fantasy Football Podcast and also on YouTube. And yeah, so join us.
As you should. Drew, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It is a pleasure to have you. And it is a pleasure to have you listeners listening to the Fresh Fantasy Podcast week after week. We have consistently grown year over year, and people are consistently blowing my mind with the numbers and the support. I cannot say thank you enough to people like you, but the thing that makes this show possible beyond me is you, the listeners, and great guests like Drew that we have on each and every single episode. This will definitely go down as one of my favorite episodes of all time, and I can confidently say that. But again, thank you so much for the listeners. As always, please leave a review. You guys already know what to do, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.